My name is Elaine Harper. I'm 64 years old, a retired nurse, a widow, and apparently an optional guest at my own son's wedding. The wedding I helped pay for. I sent Jacob $25,000 last spring. He said it was for the deposit on a charming old estate outside London, something Olivia, his fiancée, had dreamed of since she was a little girl. He promised they'd fly me out first row, front and center. I believed him until last Tuesday morning. It was early, still gray outside. I had just brewed a cup of English breakfast tea and sat by the window watching the dew slide down the glass like tears that didn't belong to me yet. That's when my phone lit up. A text. From Jacob. 8 words. Mom, don't come to the wedding. Watch via live stream. No explanation. No apology. Just a cold sentence like a door closing quietly in the night. A moment later, another text followed. If you want to be a part of it, you can watch through the Google Earth window, LOL. That LOL was a dagger in lace. I stared at the screen for a long time. The tea cooled in my hands. The room didn't move. Neither did I. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just wrote back 4 words. Sure, enjoy your big day. Then I turned off my phone. You know, the pain wasn't just in being uninvited. It wasn't even in the ridiculous suggestion to Google Earth my way into his vows. No, the real pain was in realizing I had been quietly replaced by a link, a live stream, a laugh. The next morning he called, 5 times before 9 a.m., 7 times by noon. He left voicemails, sent messages. But me, I didn't answer. I was far too busy. I was on my way to the bank. After I left the phone face down on the table, I stayed by the window longer than I should have. I watched the wind stir the grass and the early robins picking at damp soil as if they knew something was shifting in the air. That text sat in my chest like a bruise I couldn't reach, so I stood up, walked to the linen closet, and opened the old cedar box on the bottom shelf. Inside was a pair of wool slippers, gray with deep blue stitching, still wrapped in the tissue I folded around them years ago. They were never worn. I had knitted them during Jacob's first semester at NYU. I remembered the quiet click of the needles on those lonely evenings after my night shifts. The house was so still then. No footsteps on the stairs. No doors creaking open. Just me, a lamp, and the slow rhythm of yarn becoming warmth. I told myself he might wear them in the dorm during winter. Maybe when the floors were too cold or the homesickness hit a little too hard. But he never even unpacked them. They came back in the same box, untouched. I didn't mention it. I just tucked them away. I had a habit of tucking things away. I tucked away the night I held Will's hand as the machines slowed. The cancer had eaten through everything but his kindness. Jacob was 13, too young to lose a father, too old to forget it. After the funeral, Jacob asked, "Are we going to be okay?" I smiled and said yes. I didn't know if we would, but I wanted him to believe we could. So I went back to work, extra shifts, holidays, overnight doubles. I worked through flu seasons and bed shortages. I missed Christmas dinners, high school dances, and my own birthday parties. Not because I didn't want to be there, but because someone had to make sure tuition got paid. I sold my engagement ring to cover the deposit for NYU. It was a delicate band, white gold, with a single stone Will gave me after his second promotion. I remember the day he slipped it onto my finger. He called it our little North Star. I didn't tell Jacob what I'd sold. I didn't think he needed to know. When he came down with the flu during freshman year, he called me from the communal bathroom of his dorm, shivering and half delirious. "Mom," he whispered, "your soup." Only yours makes it stop hurting. I took the night bus from Boston to New York, holding a thermos the whole way. I didn't sleep. Just sat there rocking slightly with the road, praying he would still want me when I got there. He opened the door in his pajamas, pale and sweating. "You came," he said. I kissed his forehead and handed him the soup. He didn't finish it, but that didn't matter. I came. He knew I would. That was the role I lived in for decades, silent, steady, expected. Like the light in the hallway you don't notice until someone turns it off. I gave him everything I had, time, money, my health, even my future. I didn't date after Will. Not really. I told myself it was too soon then, too late then, unnecessary. What man would understand that a boy I gave birth to still owned all the best rooms of my heart? Now that same boy told me to watch his wedding from a Google Earth window. He called it a joke. But there's something cruel about jokes that find their humor in your absence. The slippers still smelled faintly of lavender. I had pressed a sachet inside to keep them fresh, just in case he ever changed his mind and wore them. But that never happened. I placed them on the kitchen table. Not to confront him. Just to remind myself that I was real. That I existed outside of his convenience. Sometimes love feels like a warm hand holding yours through the storm. And sometimes it feels like a door that never opens for you again. There were other things I kept. A drawing he made in first grade of the two of us holding hands under a crooked sun. A voicemail from sophomore year saying, "Thanks for the rent, Mom. You're the best." A single Mother's Day card with his awkward teenage handwriting spelling out, "You make hard things feel soft." I made things soft. I made them safe. I made them possible. And now I was being asked to live stream it all from afar as if my history with him was a file someone forgot to attach. I took a deep breath and picked up the slippers. They were soft in my hands, heavier than I remembered. Isn't it strange how things you made with love can one day feel like weight? I thought about bringing them to the donation center. Maybe someone else's son would appreciate warm feet. Maybe someone else's mother would be thanked. But I couldn't. Not yet. I put them back in the box gently, like laying down a child that no longer fits in your arms. I closed the lid. My name is Elaine Harper. I used to be the first person Jacob needed when his world spun sideways. And now I don't even have a seat at his wedding. The morning after I turned off my phone, the house was unusually still. Not the peaceful kind of still, but the kind that settles after an earthquake walls standing, but something inside shifted forever. I woke up early, earlier than I needed to. The sun had barely touched the tops of the trees outside. I got dressed in my usual jeans and navy cardigan. No makeup. Just lip balm and the faint scent of jasmine lotion I always kept for days. I needed to feel human. I didn't eat breakfast. Just poured myself a small thermos of coffee, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and got in the car. There wasn't traffic. The streets were quiet. But my heart wasn't. I didn't play the radio. I didn't call anyone. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my breath felt like it was borrowed. It took 17 minutes to reach First Union Bank. The lobby was warm, sterile, in that comforting way banks always try to be. Fake plants in ceramic pots. Soft instrumental music playing from invisible speakers. The receptionist smiled as I walked in, recognizing me from my previous visits. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper. Are you here to see Carlos?" I nodded. He had handled all of my accounts for the past 10 years. He helped me set up Jacob's college fund, adjusted my retirement contributions after Will passed, and guided me through a small inheritance I once received from my aunt. Carlos always remembered names' birthdays, and most importantly, what wasn't said out loud. But today, Carlos wasn't there. On vacation, the receptionist said. Instead, a younger woman approached early 20s sleek ponytail blazer, slightly too big on her shoulders. Her name tag read, Amy. "Hi, Mrs. Harper, I'll be helping you today." "Come right this way." Her voice was cheerful, polite. I followed her to the small glass office at the back, the kind with a bowl of peppermints and chairs that creaked when you shifted too much. She logged into the computer, fingers typing fast. "How can I assist you today?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I slid it across the desk without looking her in the eye. She read it quickly, then blinked. "You want to cancel the scheduled wire transfer to Regent Hill Events?" I nodded. She hesitated. This was set to go through today. Entire amount. $25,000. I know. Amy bit her lip. "May I ask?" I looked up at her. My tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't soft either. "I'm no longer invited to the event the money was for." Her face shifted just slightly. Enough to tell me she was trying to be professional, but her curiosity itched behind her polite smile. She clicked a few things on her screen. "The cancellation will take a moment. And just to confirm, you don't want to notify the recipient?" "No." "Okay." There was a long pause as her eyes scanned the screen. Then she asked gently, "Are you sure, Mrs. Harper? This payment is holding the venue deposit. From what I can see, it's covering most of the wedding." I didn't flinch, didn't blink. "I'm sure." She waited another beat, perhaps hoping I'd fill the silence with an explanation. I didn't, but something in her, maybe her youth, maybe her own upbringing, gave her the courage to ask one more time. "Forgive me if this is too personal, but it's a lot of money. Are you absolutely certain you want to cancel?" I leaned back in the chair. My voice came out calm. Too calm. "I don't believe in funding a chair I'm not allowed to sit in." Her eyes widened just a little. I could see the realization settle in. Whatever version of the story she'd imagined, it had just been replaced by something real, something complicated. She nodded. Understood. She made the final keystrokes, and I watched the screen reflect the updated status: transfer canceled. Just like that. There was no thunderclap, no dramatic music, just the soft hum of a printer and the ticking of a nearby clock. When she handed me the cancellation confirmation, she looked at me differently. Not with pity, but with something that almost felt like respect. "Is there anything else I can help you with today?" "No," I said quietly. "That's all." I stood, tucked the paper into my purse, and thanked her. Outside, the sky had turned gray. A drizzle began to speckle the windshield of my car. I sat behind the wheel for a long minute, watching the droplets race each other down the glass. Then I exhaled deep and full, like I'd been holding it for years. Back home, I made toast. I didn't eat and checked my phone. 22 missed calls. 9 from Jacob. 2 from Olivia. The rest unknown numbers, probably the event coordinator or the caterer. There were 3 voicemails and a handful of texts. "Mom, please call me. Something's wrong with the venue payment. The florist is saying they're pulling out." "Mom, what's going on?" I didn't reply. Not because I was trying to punish him, but because, for the first time in a long time, my silence felt like truth. I walked over to the kitchen table and looked at the slippers again. Still there, still soft, still clean, still unused. They were like me, once made with love, now tucked away, waiting for someone to want them. And as I sat down with my cup of coffee still hot this time, I let the thought sit with me I had been replaced with a live stream, but I could still choose what I'd fund. And my silence spoke louder than any scream ever could. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, my phone had racked up 14 missed calls from Jacob. 3 voice messages, 2 emails, 1 from Olivia, 1 from him. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I moved through the house like someone quietly tending to a museum after hours, touching objects not to use them, but to remember why I kept them in the first place. There was a bottle of red wine I had saved for a special day. A deep Bordeaux Will once gifted me on our 20th anniversary, the kind of wine you don't open for just any celebration. I had planned to save it for the night Jacob got engaged. I imagined us sitting on the back porch, toasting to his future, laughing about wedding plans, maybe even dreaming about grandchildren. But Jacob never came back for that toast. He called instead, told me over the phone. Olivia had said yes. They were getting married in London. He sounded happy, rushed, like he was checking something off a list. I remember hanging up and setting the phone down, quietly opening the wine cabinet and looking at the bottle, then closing it again. It had stayed there since. Tonight, I pulled the cork, not to celebrate, not even to mourn, but because silence deserves a companion too. I poured 1 glass and took it to the porch, wrapped myself in the soft wool shawl I knitted last fall, and sat facing the fading horizon. The clouds were low and heavy, colored with ash and apricot. The first sip burned slightly more from memory than alcohol. Inside, my phone lit up again. I didn't move, not toward it, not away from it. It buzzed once, then again, then paused, as if Jacob on the other end wasn't sure whether to beg or blame. I waited, letting the dusk press in around me, letting the wine fill the spaces where disappointment had taken root. A part of me, small and aching, wanted to listen to the voicemails, to hear his voice, to look for cracks, to search for signs that he understood. But another part, a steadier, older part, knew better. Because understanding should not require financial leverage. Because apologies should not come only when things fall apart. Because love that needs a bank account to show up is not love worth bleeding for. I closed my eyes and listened to the stillness instead. The creak of the porch swing. A neighbor's dog barking distantly. Wind rustling through the dried maple leaves along the fence line. No drama, no shouting, just me. And that felt revolutionary. Years ago, I would have answered every call. I would have soothed him, fixed things, tried to make it all work. I would have told myself he's stressed, he's overwhelmed, he doesn't mean it. But stress doesn't excuse erasure. And I was tired of making room for people who built houses without doors for me. I looked down at the wine glass, nearly half empty, and thought about all the things I had given Jacob, not just the money, not just the soup, not just the slippers, but the invisible things, the nights I didn't sleep so he could, the dreams I shelved so his could have space, the needs I swallowed whole so he never felt a burden. Mothers are trained to disappear. We iron ourselves flat so our children can rise. But somewhere along the line, I forgot to unfold. And now I was learning to take up space again. My phone buzzed once more, then stilled. I reached for it not to answer, but to turn off the ringer completely. Then I placed it face down on the porch railing like a closed book I wasn't ready to finish. This silence wasn't passive. It was purposeful. It was mine. And as I watched the last of the daylight slip behind the trees, I whispered to myself, I don't need to yell. I just need not to respond. That sentence didn't come with fireworks. It didn't make the birds fly, but it settled into me like truth. I drank the rest of the wine slowly, letting each sip mark the minutes I reclaimed. One by one. By the time I went back inside, the kitchen was dark. I turned on the light and saw the slippers still resting on the table, soft, unassuming, full of a love that once had nowhere to go. I reached out and touched them gently. A gift unclaimed doesn't mean the giver failed. It means someone else didn't know what they were holding. I folded them back into the tissue paper this time, not with grief, but with grace. Not every story needs to be retold. Some can just be put away with dignity. Later that night, I passed by my phone again. More missed calls, but still no apology. No real one. Just questions about money, timelines, logistics, venues. I didn't answer because the loudest truth I'd ever spoken didn't require a voice. It only required a boundary, and I had finally drawn one. The next afternoon brought rain. Not a downpour, just a persistent, needling drizzle that blurred the window panes and made everything outside look softer, quieter, like someone had lowered the contrast on the world. I had just brewed a second cup of tea when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people didn't visit unannounced these days, and certainly not during weather like this. Still, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked slowly to the front door, unsure whether I'd open it or simply pretend I wasn't home. But something made me reach for the knob, and when I opened it, there she was. Rachel, Jacob's college girlfriend. I hadn't seen her in nearly 7 years. She stood there in a blue raincoat hair, damp at the edges, holding a small umbrella, and looking exactly the way I remembered, only more grown somehow. The same sharp brown eyes, the same quiet composure. But now there were lines near her eyes that hadn't been there before, as if time had taught her to notice things more deeply. "Hi," she said, a little breathless. "I hope this isn't too strange. I wasn't sure if I should come." I blinked. "Rachel." She gave a sheepish nod. "I was in town visiting my mom. I heard about the wedding, from someone we both know. And well, I felt like I should see you." I stepped aside without speaking and gestured her in. She took off her coat, folded her umbrella neatly, and followed me into the kitchen like she'd never stopped coming here. Like all those weekends in her 20s when she and Jacob would bake cookies or sit on the couch arguing about movies hadn't evaporated. I poured her a cup of tea without asking. She took it gratefully. We sat down across from each other at the kitchen table. The rain tapped lightly against the window, steady like a clock. Rachel held the cup in both hands and stared at the steam curling upward. "I'm sorry," she said, breaking the silence. "For what's happened? You don't deserve this." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stirred my tea slowly, watching the little whirlpool form in the mug. I didn't want comfort. Not from her. But I wasn't angry she came. There was something about her presence that felt right. Or maybe familiar. "I heard Olivia didn't want you there," Rachel continued softly. "I heard she made that decision. But Jacob, he didn't stop it." Still, I said nothing. Rachel placed her cup down, gently letting it click on the saucer. "I'm not here to gossip," she said. I want you to know this didn't come out of nowhere." I looked up at her then. She met my eyes with something that wasn't pity. It was closer to regret. Back when we were dating, she began carefully. "Olivia and I were part of the same circle. You remember that time at Jacob's graduation party? When Olivia stopped by, I nodded. She made a comment that night, loud enough for others to hear. She said, 'Jacob's mom is nice, but you can tell she's just working class, like she's never left the nurse's station. Rachel's voice didn't rise. She wasn't looking for drama. She was just stating facts like reading aloud from a report. Except every word dropped like a pebble in my chest. "I told Jacob," she said. He brushed it off, said Olivia didn't mean it, but she said it again, later, and when I asked him to speak up, he wouldn't. Her gaze fell to the table. I think, over time, he started believing it. Or at least, he stopped seeing what made you extraordinary. I felt something tighten in my ribs. Not because Olivia had looked down on me. That didn't hurt me. People like her always did. I had no need for their approval. No. What bruised me was Jacob's silence, his easy dismissal, his failure to say, "That's my mother, and you will respect her." That was what stung, not the insult, but the absence of defense. I picked up my tea and blew on the surface, though it had already cooled. I always told myself, I said quietly, that he'd come back to me. That even if he got caught up in careers and cities and other people's opinions, that I'd always be home to him. Rachel didn't speak. She just listened. I took another sip. But maybe I continued. I was just the bridge he needed to cross. And now that he's on the other side, he doesn't look back. Rachel reached out and touched my hand lightly. I don't believe that she said, but I do think he's lost his compass. I didn't reply. Instead, I looked toward the hallway, toward the small cabinet where I kept the photo albums. The wedding photo, the baby shoes, the report cards. All those things I'd preserved like proof, as if someday someone would audit my motherhood. I thought of all the times I'd stayed up while Jacob slept. All the times I'd celebrated his wins in silence so he could have the spotlight. All the times I'd made space so he could take up more. I thought of the slippers still tucked away, never worn. And I thought of the way he used to say, "Mom," like it was a safe place. Now I was an afterthought, a line item in a budget, a name to be removed from a guest list. Rachel took another sip and placed the cup back down with care. "I didn't know if I should tell you," she said, but I couldn't sit with it anymore. "You did the right thing," I whispered. She smiled gently. "You always treated me like family, even when Jacob didn't." I nodded, feeling the ache settle deep into my bones. I didn't cry, but I did allow myself to feel it fully, and that somehow felt like progress. As Rachel stood to leave, I walked her to the door. We didn't hug. We didn't say too much. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled like wet earth and spring. Before she stepped off the porch, she turned to me. "If he ever remembers who he is and who you are, I hope he finds his way back." I gave her a small smile, and if he doesn't, Rachel looked down, then back at me. Then he didn't deserve the way back. I stood in the doorway long after she'd gone, letting her words soak into me like the rain had into the soil. And as I closed the door, I thought, I'm not angry at Olivia. I'm not even angry at Jacob's choices. I'm hurt because my silence once meant comfort. Now it means I'm invisible. And that is what breaks a mother. Not rejection, but being quietly erased. 2 days after Rachel left, the silence shifted. It wasn't gone, but it changed shape, less like an absence, more like a space I was no longer trying to fill. I had stopped checking my phone. I'd silenced notifications, turned off badges. I only looked when I needed to call the pharmacy or confirm a library hold. That morning, I opened my email simply to delete junk, and that's when I saw it. From Jacob Harper, subject: "We need to talk." I stared at the line for a full minute before clicking. The message wasn't long, but It was long enough to say too little. Mom, I don't really know how to start this. I've been meaning to write sooner, but everything's just complicated. The wedding stuff has gotten out of hand. Olivia's parents are putting pressure on us, and I'm stuck in the middle. I didn't mean for it to turn out this way. I just didn't know how to say no to anyone. I get that you're upset, but this is my life too. I can't make everyone happy. The thing with the live stream, it wasn't supposed to be cruel. It was just a temporary fix. I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd always be there. I'm sorry. I really am. Jacob, no love, no warmth, just Jacob explaining things to himself more than to me. I read it once, then again, and on the second read the phrase that landed hardest wasn't, "I'm sorry." It was, "I thought you'd always be there." That line hit different, because that's the lie so many children believe when they're loved unconditionally. They think unconditional means unchanging. They think always means forever, no matter how far they push. And I had let him believe that. I'd modeled it, enabled it, reinforced it with every sacrifice I made quietly, without asking for anything in return. But love, real love, is not license. And presence, true presence, is not guaranteed. I sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of that realization settle between my shoulder blades like a winter coat I had carried too long. He didn't write to ask forgiveness. He wrote to reset expectations. He wasn't inviting me back into his life. He was trying to make sure I stayed in orbit, silent, reliable, available when needed, like the moon. But I wasn't the moon. I was a person. I didn't reply, not because I was angry. That had passed, not because I wanted to punish him. That would have required more energy than I had left to spend. But because some things don't need answers. Some things need silence. I walked into the kitchen, opened the window, and let in the late spring air. It smelled like cut grass and the faintest hint of salt from the harbor. I stood there, letting it wash over me. Then I whispered aloud, just for myself. If I can be replaced by a live stream, then my financial support can be replaced with a click too. It wasn't cruel. It was balance. It was the first time I had matched the energy I'd been given, without guilt, without apology. I printed the email, folded it in half, and placed it in the same box where the slippers lived. Not because I wanted to preserve it, but because I wanted to remember this moment, not as heartbreak, but as clarity. Because now I understood Jacob didn't choose Olivia over me. He chose ease over discomfort. He chose silence over confrontation. And in doing so, he unknowingly taught me something I had spent 6 decades avoiding. That love, when not matched with respect, becomes exploitation. It was never about the money. It was about the fact that he believed I owed him something, even my absence. And I didn't. Not anymore. After I printed Jacob's email and tucked it into the same box that held the unworn slippers, I stood still for a long moment in my hallway. I wasn't grieving anymore. Grief is sharp, active, demanding. What I felt now was quieter. It didn't sting, it settled. And in that stillness, I made a decision not loud or dramatic, but sturdy, like the turning of a key. I was going to build a life that didn't wait. That evening, I signed up for a pottery class. It was offered at the local community center Tuesday nights, 2 hours open to beginners of any age. I walked there the following week with my sleeves rolled up and my heart still unsure, but something inside me tugged forward. The classroom smelled like clay and wet wood. Women of all kinds had gathered: widows, divorcees, a few never marrieds, and one delightful 70-year-old with purple hair and an earring shaped like a teacup. Her name was Marilyn. We didn't ask each other who we were to other people. No one asked about husbands or kids. It was a kind of unspoken agreement. Here we were just ourselves. Our hands in the mud. Our stories unwritten. The first time I touched the clay, I flinched. It was colder than I expected. But as I pressed my palms into it, forming a bowl that wouldn't quite hold water, something inside me exhaled. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be mine. Later that week, I visited the garden center and bought 3 rose bushes. One white one, pale yellow, and one deep crimson. I had always loved roses, but never had the time or truthfully the energy to tend to them. I was always tending to someone else. I planted them in the backyard near the fence, where the sunlight poured down strongest in the late afternoon. Digging into the soil, I felt the ache in my knees and the sun on my shoulders. It didn't feel like work. It felt like presence. The next morning, I made breakfast just for me. Toast with almond butter blueberries in a small ceramic bowl I didn't save for guests, and fresh coffee, in the mug I'd once considered too pretty for everyday use. I sat by the window with a book, Persuasion by Jane Austen, and read slowly, one chapter at a time, letting the words soak into me like sunlight into leaves. It had been years since I'd read anything without distraction. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't multitasking. I wasn't planning meals, managing emergencies, or stretching myself thin for someone else's comfort. I was simply being. One afternoon after pottery class, Marilyn invited me and a few of the other women to her home for tea. We sat in her sunroom, surrounded by mismatched chairs and potted plants with names. Her cat Stanley claimed the warmest cushion and didn't care who else needed it. We laughed. We shared stories, not always sad, but honest. No one performed. No one tried to impress. One woman, Celia, shared that she had walked away from a 40-year marriage where she was invisible by year 15. Another, Nadine, said she'd spent decades raising children who now spoke to her only on holidays out of obligation, not affection. I didn't say much. I just listened. Not out of shyness, but out of awe. There was something sacred about the quiet resilience in that room. These women weren't broken. They weren't bitter. They were becoming. And I realized so was I. That night, as I walked home under the early evening sky, I thought about all the years I'd spent seeking proof that I was enough, that I'd done right, that I mattered. I used to think validation had to come from the outside, from thank yous and weddings and reserved seats. But now I understood. Some of the most important roles we play in life leave no receipts, and I didn't need one anymore. I was no longer the background character in someone else's story. I was the main character in mine. At home, I tidied the kitchen and lit a small candle by the sink. I stood there for a moment, just breathing in the scent jasmine and lemon peel, and I thought, I don't need anyone to confirm I was a good mother. I just need peace at my own breakfast table. It was simple, unremarkable maybe to some, but to me it was everything. Because when a woman finally chooses herself after decades of disappearing, it doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like slow mornings. It looks like clay under fingernails and dirt on gardening gloves. It looks like saying no without explaining why. It looks like not answering the phone. It looks like making space, not just to give, but to receive. And maybe, just maybe, that's where healing begins. Not in the apology you never get, but in the life you stop postponing. It was a Thursday. The kind of day that didn't ask much of you, soft light through the blinds, a sky that couldn't decide between sun or shade. I had just come in from checking on the roses when I passed the linen closet and, without even thinking, opened the bottom drawer. There they were, the slippers, still wrapped in tissue paper, tucked in beside a sachet of dried lavender I'd replaced once or twice over the years, though they had never been used. I picked them up and held them in my hands for a moment. Soft, light, woven with a kind of quiet love that asks for nothing in return. And for the first time since I knit them, I decided to wash them. Not to send, not to give away, not for Jacob, but for me. The act felt gentle, like tending to an old scar. I filled the sink with lukewarm water, added a touch of wool-safe detergent, and let the slippers soak. The lavender scent lifted, mingling with something older, maybe the smell of wool and memory. I sat beside the sink as they floated there, and I thought about the first time I imagined his feet in them. I thought about the December night. I stayed up until 2 a.m., finishing the last stitch, imagining a son who might come home for the holidays and say, "Thanks, Mom. These are perfect." But he never wore them. He never even opened the box. And for a long time, that detail had hurt more than I admitted. Not because of the slippers themselves, but because of what they represented: care offered and care ignored. I rinsed them, gently wrung out the water, and set them on a towel near the window to dry. Then I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile this time, and sat at the table watching the slippers as they lay there like small sleeping creatures. It struck me then how much I had carried on faith, how many things I'd preserved, not because they were needed, but because they were mine to give. That's the thing no one tells you about motherhood. It's not just what you do. It's what you hold. You hold space. You hold silence. You hold your tongue. You hold your breath. And sometimes you hold on far longer than you should. I reached for my notebook, the one I kept now, not for lists or errands, but for thoughts that didn't need to go anywhere else. And I wrote in careful script, if my presence can be replaced by Google Earth, then my love can be folded just as neatly and put away. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was reality, soft-edged but sharp enough to teach. I let that sentence sit on the page. I didn't dress it up. I didn't justify it. Then I put the pen down and walked back to the slippers. They were nearly dry. I folded them heel to toe, toe to heel, and wrapped them again in fresh tissue, this time without the lavender. I didn't need them to smell like memory anymore. Just peace. I placed them back in the cedar box, along with the printed email and a small photo of Jacob when he was 6, missing his front teeth, holding a paper crown he'd made me for Mother's Day. I kept the photo. I'd never get rid of that. But the slippers, they were no longer unfinished business. They were complete in their own quiet way. They had served their purpose, not to warm his feet, but to remind me of what I am capable of making. And making something with love, even when it goes unseen, still matters. Still counts. Still leaves a mark. I closed the lid, set the box gently back on the shelf, and stood there for a moment longer, letting my hands fall to my sides. There was no music, no speech, no ceremonial goodbye, just air and stillness and the slight relief of letting go. Sometimes healing doesn't look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing in a hallway folding away a pair of slippers no one ever wore, and choosing to keep living anyway. It was almost summer by the time it all fell apart. The roses in the backyard had started to bloom. I would check on them each morning, white, yellow, and red. The petals were full and open, reaching quietly toward the light like they had nothing to prove. That's how I wanted to live now. Not bracing for pain, not waiting for an apology, just reaching for whatever peace I could find. I was rinsing out a flower pot when my phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. I ignored it. These days, I didn't reach for every sound. I had learned that not everything deserved my immediate attention. But then, it buzzed again. And again. And finally, I glanced at the screen. Jacob. For the first time in weeks, I opened the message. I messed up, Mom. Just that. No punctuation, no explanation, no offer of repair. I stared at the words, letting them settle. It was the first message that didn't demand anything from me. Not my money, not my understanding, not my silence, just admission. A truth finally spoken aloud. I didn't reply, but I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I smiled, not out of joy, and not because it made things right, but because it meant I didn't have to carry the entire truth alone anymore. He had said it, not me. And that changed everything. I set the phone down, poured myself a glass of iced tea, and stepped outside. The sun was soft on my shoulders, and the roses looked proud as if they knew something good had taken root in me. I sat down on the porch and thought about how the wedding had unraveled. I hadn't followed it obsessively, but in a small town, word travels. And I had friends in places Olivia's family would never guess. The florist pulled out first after the final payment didn't arrive. Then the venue canceled. Too close to the date. Non-refundable. Then Olivia's parents, who had initially offered to make up the difference, changed their minds when they realized how much they were being asked to cover. There had been shouting, according to one mutual acquaintance. Accusations. A broken engagement announced quietly just weeks before the ceremony. No public statement. Just a quiet fading of social media posts and polite silence from the once overbearing mother of the bride. And Jacob, I don't know where he went after that. But I do know this. He didn't come here. And I didn't ask him to. Because sometimes healing means not reopening doors just because someone finally knocks. Sometimes love means walking away from the version of someone who keeps wounding you, even if they finally see the bruise. It's not about punishment. It's about preservation. And I had preserved enough people in my lifetime. It was time to preserve myself. That afternoon, I brought out the clay bowl I'd made in class, the first one that hadn't collapsed in my hands. It was imperfect, tilted slightly to one side. But it held water. I filled it with lemon slices and cool tea and set it on the porch railing, letting the light catch in its curves. I thought about how many versions of motherhood I'd lived through. The nurturer, the fixer, the quiet backbone, the invisible pillar. And now, I was none of those things. And still somehow whole. I remembered once when Jacob was little, he'd broken a dish while trying to help me set the table. He cried, terrified he'd ruined something important. I'd knelt beside him, held his hands in mine, and said, "Nothing that breaks in this house will ever be held against you. But you still have to help clean it up." He had nodded, tears still on his cheeks. I wonder now if he remembered that moment. If he knew that brokenness and responsibility could coexist, that grace didn't mean escape. Maybe that's what his message meant. Maybe not. But either way, it wasn't my job to teach him anymore. My job now was to live, not out of spite, not out of sadness, but out of choice. So I took a walk to the library that evening, barefoot in my garden sandals, the kind with dust from last summer still clinging to the soles. I checked out another Jane Austen novel and a book on growing heirloom vegetables. I made plans with Marilyn to visit a local craft fair the following weekend, and I marked the next Tuesday on my calendar with a small heart. Pottery class, because the clay at least always forgave me when I got it wrong, and offered itself again, reshaped and ready every time I showed up. Back at home, I lit a candle by the window, not for remembrance, but for softness, for light that didn't demand to be seen, just felt. The phone buzzed once more that night. I didn't look. Instead, I whispered to the stillness around me. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. The difference was everything. And in the quiet that followed, I felt the full weight of what I'd given and what I'd finally kept for myself. A mother's love doesn't disappear when uninvited, but it can choose where to land. And mine, it was landing back inside me, where it belonged. It's quiet tonight, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel hollow, but whole, like a pause that's been earned. I'm in the kitchen, wrapping a small box with care. Not because I plan to send it anywhere, but because there's something sacred in giving things a place. Inside the box is the pair of slippers I made for Jacob during his first semester at NYU. They've been washed, dried, folded, and wrapped again, this time in new tissue with my initials gently penciled in one corner. I slide the lid on and tie it with twine. Then I set it in the drawer of the sideboard next to a small notebook that holds the pieces of me I no longer need to prove. I pour myself a cup of chamomile tea, add a splash of honey, and carry it into the living room. The lamp casts a warm, golden pool across the floorboards, and the old jazz station hums softly from the radio. Ella Fitzgerald's voice floats through the room like an old friend returning from a long journey. I sit in my favorite chair, the one by the window where the light is best, and open the notebook. I flip past old pages filled with questions, doubts, bits of poetry I never finished, and settle on a clean sheet. I pick up my pen steady in my hand and write, "Love without dignity isn't love. It's charity. And I've given enough." I underline it once, not because I'm angry, but because it's true. There's a difference between giving and being emptied. And for too long, I didn't know where that line was. I thought if I just kept pouring out love, someone would notice when the pitcher ran dry. But they didn't. And now I refill it for myself. Every morning I spend tending roses. Every evening I choose rest over guilt. Every class I take, every page I read, every hour I give to no one but me. It adds water back to the well. Jacob hasn't written since that last text. I haven't checked for more. Not because I'm closing the door, but because I've opened another one that leads inward. I still love him. That hasn't changed, but I no longer make myself small to fit inside the version of motherhood he prefers, one that stays quiet, available, unquestioning. I am not a shadow. I am not a live stream link. I am not a chair you forget to reserve. I am a woman who once gave everything without asking for anything back. And I've learned that isn't strength. That's surrender. And I'm done surrendering to people who only call when they're falling apart. The tea is warm in my hands. I sip it slowly. Outside, a soft breeze stirs the wind chimes I hung last fall, each note delicate, deliberate. I let it wash over me. I think about the other women from pottery class, about Celia and Nadine and Marilyn and the way we exist together without asking too much, without digging into each other's wounds. We just show up. We make things. We laugh when the clay collapses. We try again. It's not a grand life, but it is mine. I don't spend my days hoping Jacob will come back. I spend them making space for something else to grow. Maybe one day he will knock on my door, not for help, not for money, but just to say, "I see you now." If he does, I'll be here. Not waiting. Just living. And if he never does, that's okay too. Because I've already returned to the one person I lost in all of this myself. Before I turn in for the night, I close the notebook and place it on the windowsill. I light a candle, jasmine and sage, and let its flame flicker for a while before I blow it out. I whisper into the quiet. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can say is nothing at all. And I mean it. Not everything deserves an answer. Some things only need a boundary. And in setting that line, not out of anger, but out of clarity, I've finally stepped out of the background of my own life. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.